This is pretty huge, guys, because in this episode, we figured out the radiator, the steering, and the brakes. Now, all we need is a throttle pedal, and this thing would actually run and drive. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Rusto Mod. We are back on the Sasquatch project, our 1959 Ford F250 that in the last few episodes we actually chassis swapped onto a 1994 7.3 turbo diesel F250 chassis. And in the last episode, we're trying to figure out how to fit our pedals because our motor is super far back. So we ended up making a false firewall so that we can remove it to be able to access the motor. And it was a lot of fabrication stuff and it turned out okay, but we still have the issue with our tiny little pedal room. So in this episode, we're gonna try to figure out what we're gonna do. So let's dig in. All right, so on the last episode, you saw we made our transmission tunnel / doghouse cover that we could remove to be able to get it out of the way in case we have to work on it. So now that we got that in there, I wanna start figuring out the pedals. So like I said in the previous episode, we have to move the pedals super far over because the motor is so far back. Luckily, this truck was a manual transmission truck, so I had to remove the brake pedal, which is right here, and actually use the clutch pedal as my new brake pedal. So we're kind of going to be sitting a little bit farther over than we were in the regular original truck. Now, the pedals in the original truck weren't the most comfortable anyway, so I think I'm just going to make it as best as I can and then just kind of move the seat where I need it to make it more comfortable. But we're gonna have a limited amount of space, so what we kind of get is what we got to work with. So if you can see here, I have a little bit of room for a gas pedal to fit in there, and then my steering column is gonna mount right here. So I'm going to try to make the clutch pedal my new brake pedal, and that's the first thing that we have to get started on. So the reason I like doing these chassis swap projects is if you start with a full running driving vehicle, you can use all the parts off of that running driving vehicle on the new older truck that you're gonna swap. So I pulled off the brake booster and it still has the master cylinder down there. And I pulled off the gas pedal that is originally on the truck. So I'm going to try to make the brake booster fit in the old clutch position spot. I think the clutch pedal position is going to be perfectly fine for what we're doing. So let's figure out a way to mount our brake booster to our original clutch position, see if we can line it up a little bit, and then try to bolt it in place and see how our pedal lines up. Okay, so we kind of got our brake booster kind of held there into place. You can kind of see it is very close to the engine. I actually had to remove the little breather on the top of the valve cover, so we might have to figure something out for that. But the booster is in place and it looks pretty good in the engine bay. But you can see underneath the dash here that the brake booster lines up pretty good with our clutch pedal right there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna center this up. Obviously it's just sitting down on the bottom of that radius right here. I'm gonna center it up and I'm gonna mark the drill hole pattern for the booster. And we have a big thick plate right here that we can drill into to be able to mount that booster to the firewall. So how I'm gonna mount the booster to the firewall is I'm just gonna drill that hole pattern into that little bracket that's behind the dash. So how I'm gonna get the hole pattern for the firewall is they have this little piece of plastic bracket that came from the original truck. It's kind of broken up, but it's gonna be able to give me that hole pattern. So if I stick it in there, I should be able to mark the holes where they need to go, drill them in there, and it centers it up on the hole in the firewall. So that way I know it's kind of up and down and side to side where it needs to go. Well, we got our booster mounted into place. So that was pretty easy. Just a few holes in the firewall into that plate where the pedal box originally mounts. And then what I like about this, and the best part about doing a chassis swap this way, is you can just throw up your master cylinder onto the booster and you don't even have to bleed any brake lines. Now we are going to have to do that because, like I said, we're going to have to cut this frame down to be able to fit the original bed. But if you had a truck where the chassis wheelbase was the same, you probably could get by with not even doing brake lines, which is super cool. So we are going to throw up the master cylinder real quick, and then we're going to see how our clearance looks underneath the dash. All right, so our engine bay is looking a little better. So we got our brake booster and our master cylinder mounted up there to the firewall. So that's all good to go. The reason I wanted to put the master cylinder on right now is so I can see where this rod is going to stick out, so that way I can line my pedal up. So it looks like it'll line up perfectly right there. So I'm going to mark it, and then I'm going to drill a hole into this pedal rod and then put a shoulder bolt in there. So that way our pedal is connected to the master cylinder and we'll have some brakes. All right, so we got our booster, our master cylinder, and we got our brake pedal hooked up, and we have a pedal. Didn't even have to bleed the brakes. Pretty easy on this one. So now we can kind of see the room that we have for our steering column, and that's what I want to kind of figure out next. You can see I have one of these kind of universal mounts for the bottom of the dash, and now that our booster's in the way there, I got to figure out how I'm going to fit the mount, which is going to look something like this, for the steering column to go up in through the dash. So I don't want to hit the booster, and I want to kind of get a good angle so we can hit the original steering box down there. So we have to figure this out, and I'm going to try to measure some stuff. I really don't like how this universal mount kind of mounts directly under the dash at a 90-degree angle. I would really like this thing to kind of tilt so that way the steering column isn't straight up and down. So I'm going to mess with it a little bit, and I'll show you guys what I come up with. All right, guys, well, the steering might be a little bit more tricky than I originally thought. So I got one of these universal kind of tilt columns. I use these in basically everything. You can get them cheap on Amazon, and I have a tilt column in this especially because I'm pretty sure this angle of the steering column is going to be kind of weird. So that way we can adjust it so that way it makes it a little bit more comfortable. Now, the steering bracket thing that I bought just isn't really going to work, but at least it's in there so I can kind of hold it up into place. Now, it wasn't really going to work because this is too tight around the column, and it basically makes the column at like 90 degrees, and I need it to be at a little bit of an angle. So they do sell some that can fold at an angle. I'm not sure if I'm going to end up just making a bracket and then making it work that way, or just buying something, but I want to try to get the angle figured out so that way I can see where I need to drill the hole in for the firewall. And I really only have one option, which is kind of where it's sitting right now. So basically I have the motor right here and I have the booster right here. So there's one little spot between both of them where I can fit my firewall mount for my steering column. So I have it marked up. I'm going to go ahead, pull this out of the way, and then pop a hole in the firewall, and then mount up the bracket that mounts the steering column to the firewall. So that way I can get that all set and then get the rest of it in there. This little ball and socket thing kind of sucks, I'm not gonna lie. We used it before on the wheelies and I don't remember it being that bad, but maybe it's the steering column because it's painted or something, but it does not want to slide up and down the column. I really had to smack it on there with a hammer, but I did get it installed. So that's what that's going to look like on the firewall. And then obviously this is just kind of a mock-up to hold it up in place, but it's going to look something like this. So if we go to the outside, you can see our steering column there, and then we have to go down here to the steering box. So luckily I was able to find the spline that is used on the steering box in a universal joint. Same thing with the steering column, and then just run a double D shaft in between. All right, so for under the hood, this is basically what I'm going to run. So you can see we have a spline shaft on one end, and then we have our double D shaft, which I'm probably gonna have to cut to length. And then on the other end, we have the shaft that's gonna go to the steering column. So that's what it's gonna look like. So now I gotta throw it under the hood and measure it to see how much I need to cut off of this shaft. All right, well, I decided that I'm not gonna cut the steering shaft just yet. I gotta figure out what I'm gonna mount underneath the dash. So I ordered some parts to get that figured out, but they're not gonna be in for a few days. So in the meantime, let's move on to the next project, which is going to be mounting the radiator underneath the hood. That way we can get all that done, and then by the time we're done with that, hopefully that part comes in and we can finish the steering. So for our radiator, I want to try to use the original radiator that came out of the truck. It was made for this motor, so I want to make it as simple as possible and reuse it. I have the upper radiator hose here. The lower radiator hose is down there. I want to try to space the radiator enough so that way the hoses line up good and it fits in there kind of like it did from the factory. So I have my radiator here. Let me grab it and see how it fits under the hood, and then we can see how far we have to space it to be able to make some brackets to mount it. All right, this thing is absolutely huge. So hopefully it fits down in there. Actually, guys, that fits pretty good right on that little mount where the original radiator went. It does look like our hoses are going to be a little short, so we're going to have to kind of push it towards the motor, but that fits the opening pretty much perfect. Well, I'm really happy with the way that kind of just sits in there. So from the front, this opening on the front I thought would be a little small, but it actually fits the 94 radiator in there pretty perfectly. So I'm happy with that, but it's just sitting on this little edge here that held the original radiator. So to get our hoses to work and to be original, it looks like we need to come up probably like 2 or 3 inches to be able to get a little bit closer to that fan. So we're gonna have to make some brackets and make it work. But for a starting point, this is pretty good. I think it's gonna work out pretty awesome where we can have the original radiator so we don't have to worry about anything aftermarket. So doing a little thinking about how I wanna mount the radiator. So it has this nice flange on here that the original radiator mounted to. So what I'm thinking is I'm just gonna shift that forward and make a little bracket in here to kind of grab the mounting tabs that are on the radiator. Now, if you guys don't know, for my real job, I work at a machine shop and they do a lot of bending of aluminum, and these are called test bends. So to try to get a 90-degree, they'll do a test bend on a piece of scrap and see how it looks. So I always grab these out of the scrap bin so I can use them for stuff like this. And this one, if I mount it here, should fit pretty perfectly in that little spot there. So I think I'm just going to drill a hole in here and then offset it out the distance that I need to be able to hit that radiator hose, and that will be my radiator mount. All right, after looking at this thing a bunch, I don't really like the spacing with the radiator super far forward. So pretty much disregard everything I just said. Let me show you what I'm gonna do now. So I really didn't like how far forward the radiator was. I just didn't think it looked very good, and it fits perfectly where it is right now. So even from the front, it just looked really odd with a big gap in there, and I wasn't really happy with it. It'll also be a lot easier to work on the motor because the radiator is a little bit farther forward. So I think I really wanted to try to use the factory hoses. I might just try to find some longer ones to be able to reach it. I'm going to actually just mount the radiator kind of where it is right now. So I'm going to make the brackets where it is currently because I think it fits the best right there. So let's make them up and mount this radiator. All right, guys, well, we got that radiator installed. So we have the upper radiator mount right here, and I threw some rib nuts in there, so it's real easy to pull out. So now we have to figure out what we're gonna do for the lower radiator mount. The original Ford bracket up at the top was really close together for the two holes that were in the bracket that we spaced off of for the upper mount. So I kind of want to grab it a little bit farther down. Now, the 94 had a little trough that kind of grabbed the bottom of the radiator. So I kind of want to do something a little bit similar and grab it from the very bottom. So what I'm thinking is it has these two bolts here that kind of hold this piece of sheet metal on here at the bottom. So the frame also has a hole here that I can kind of come off of. So I have these pieces of aluminum that have a 90-degree bend in them. So I'm thinking I'm going to drill a hole in there and then bend this another 90 degrees and then grab this hole here. So that way it can come up and grab that bolt. So I can throw some bolts in there and then pull it out real easy. So now I'm going to have to figure out how much I'm going to need to bend this and measure this. So let me do that real quick. We'll bend it up, drill some holes in it, and install our bottom bracket. We got our lower radiator mount in there, so that is bolted to the frame and then kind of Z'd up to the radiator. So I'm pretty happy with the way it came out. It's pretty sturdy. It ain't gonna really go anywhere. So we got the mount up there, mount on the bottom. So now we have to figure out the radiator hoses and try to find some longer ones. I'm gonna go check to see if we can find some radiator hoses at the auto parts store. Hopefully they have some. A lot of times you can go in the back and see if you can find one that fits. So I'm gonna try that. If not, I'll have to get some from online. So let's run over there real quick and see if we can find something. Well, I went to the auto parts store, grabbed some hoses, and it looks like it's gonna work. So this one's obviously way too big, but I can trim it down, and that looks like the upper one's going to work. Same thing with the bottom one. The bottom one's a different size, it's much bigger, so I think I can make this work. So I'm gonna trim these up, get them on there, and then our radiator should be done. Well, it looks a little bit more complete now with some radiator hoses. So we were able to make those work. Some of them are a little big, but I clamped them down. If it ends up leaking, I'll probably just put a reducer in there. But for now, I think that's gonna work. We got our upper radiator hose on there, and then down there, you can see we got our loaded radiator hose. The radiator should be pretty much done, at least for now. I really wanted to get this in there, the brakes and the steering, because I want to be able to pull this front clip off so that way it's a lot easier to work on. But I got to get all the stuff that mounts to the front clip done first, so that way when I put it back together, to be ready to go. Now I want to try to mess with the steering again. I was looking at it. I did order another piece for it, but I think I want to try to make the bracket that we have work. If it doesn't work the way I'm thinking, then we have that new one coming. But I think if I grind it out a little bit, I might be able to get that to sit up in there, and it might work a little bit better. So let me mess with this some, and I'll show you guys what I come up with. Well, I wasn't sure if this was gonna work, but I basically ground down the inside here to try to make it curved so that way it can fit on the steering column with an angle, and I got it fitting pretty tight. So I'm gonna try to bolt it up and see how it looks, and then I can kind of get an idea of where the column's gonna sit. Well, very surprisingly, that actually worked. You can see I did have to beat it up a little bit, but it is flush in there, and that's tightened all the way down at an angle. And the column is very tight in there. Now, I really want that tight because this is the only thing keeping the column from moving back and forth. It does have a set screw in the bottom of it, so I can also tighten that up. I am pretty happy with it, so I think now I can go ahead and cut this rod and we should have steering. This is pretty huge, guys, because in this episode, we figured out the radiator, the steering, and the brakes. Now, all we need is a throttle pedal, and this thing would actually run and drive, which is really cool. So now that we got the steering shaft hooked up, I need to be able to turn it so I can tighten all the bolts up, but I don't have a steering wheel, so I'm gonna assemble the rest of the steering column now that it's mounted in there. So let's go ahead and put that together, and then I kind of need to figure out a seat. So that's the next step. We got our steering wheel in there with the steering column, and the steering works, which is super cool. So we have steering, we have brakes, we have a transmission tunnel, we got a radiator, we got a booster. We got a bunch of stuff done on this thing, and now I want to try to fit a seat in there. Now, I haven't found the seat that I really want to put in this truck. I'm really looking to find a King Ranch bench seat. I think that would be super cool. The cool King Ranch distressed leather and the Sasquatch kind of distressed style I think would go together really good. So if you have one, send me a message on Instagram or Facebook or an email. I'll put it down in the description. Let me know if you have one, because I'd really like to get one in here, and they're kind of hard to find. But for now, I do have some Tahoe seats that I can throw in here just to kind of mock up and see how the pedals and the steering feel with a seat in there. So let me go grab that real quick, throw it in here, and see how it looks. Well, I got this third row from a Tahoe, like a GMT 800 Tahoe, and that is in there just as a temporary seat. Have it spaced up on some blocks of wood, but it fits in there pretty decently. I actually really like the GMT 800 seats because the seat belt is integrated with the actual seat itself. So I really like that, but I'm not really a fan of this like light tan color. So maybe I could find some of these that are a little bit darker brown. I think that would be cool. But anyway, just for mock-up purposes, we got that in there. We got our steering column. We got our brake pedal. So now I'm going to try to figure out how the gas pedal feels. So I'm going to sit in there, kind of get an idea of how it's going to feel. Hopefully it's not too bad. I actually haven't sat in this truck in a long time. Tahoe seat's pretty good, actually. Kind of like it. It's kind of small, and just with some wood underneath, like this position is pretty good. Definitely a little tight with the pedals, but it's really not that bad. I thought this would be way worse. The steering's perfect. I think if I have the tilt adjustment on the column. That looks good. The brake pedal is a little high, but with the gas pedal, which is 90% of where you're at, that's pretty good. If I had the gas pedal right here and then the brake pedal here, it feels normal. But I am really shifted over with the seat, so maybe that's what I will do with the new seat that I put in here, is actually shift it to the driver's side, so that way I have like a normal foot position. But I thought this would be way worse, and it really actually feels pretty good. So if I have my gas pedal here, my brake pedal here, it feels normal. And the steering column is in pretty much a normal spot, which is what I was worried about earlier with having to move everything over. But it feels good. I think this is perfect. I think it's going to work out good. All right, guys. Well, we are knocking out the list on this project. It really hasn't taken us that long. Only a few weeks ago was this 2 separate trucks, but it's really starting to take shape. So we got the steering knocked out. We got the brakes knocked out. We have a radiator in there. We got kind of a mock-up seat in there. So the only thing left to do is really wire this thing up, put a throttle pedal in it, and drive it down the road. But it's not that easy. We have a lot more work ahead of us. So make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe so you can stay up to date on all the episodes here on Russo Mod. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you guys in the next one.